Sarah Mitchell thought she'd left her military days behind when she hung up her combat boots for a classroom whiteboard. But when a group of teenage bullies decided to make her life hell at Jefferson High School, they had no idea they were about to face someone who could dismantle their entire operation with surgical precision. What started as shattered car windows would end with shattered egos, and a lesson these kids would never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell pulled into the faculty parking lot of Jefferson High School at exactly 7:15 a.m., just like she had every morning for the past 3 years. The autumn leaves crunched under her Honda Civic's tires as she navigated to her usual spot near the science wing. At 32, Sarah had found her rhythm as a chemistry teacher, but the morning routine still felt foreign compared to her previous life. 5 years ago, she'd been Staff Sergeant Mitchell, leading reconnaissance missions in hostile territory. Now she was Miss Mitchell, trying to get 17-year-olds excited about molecular structures and periodic tables. The transition hadn't been easy, but teaching gave her something the military never could: the chance to build rather than destroy. Jefferson High sat in the heart of Millbrook, a middle-class suburb outside Detroit where most families fell somewhere between comfortable and struggling. The school served about 1,200 students, and Sarah had earned a reputation as one of the tougher teachers. Not mean, just demanding. Her students knew she expected excellence, and most of them rose to meet it. Sarah gathered her leather satchel and travel mug from the passenger seat, checking her watch. She liked arriving early to review her lesson plans and set up lab equipment before the chaos began. The parking lot was mostly empty, except for a few other early arriving teachers and the custodial staff. As she stepped out of her car, she noticed something glinting on the asphalt near her front tire. Kneeling down, she picked up a small piece of glass, then another. Her eyes followed the trail of glass fragments, and her stomach dropped. Both front windows of her Honda were completely destroyed. Not cracked, obliterated. Glass covered the interior seats, dashboard, and floor. Her chemistry textbooks, which she'd left on the passenger seat, were buried under a layer of razor-sharp fragments. Sarah's military training kicked in immediately. She didn't panic or cry out. Instead, she methodically examined the scene, her mind cataloging details with the precision of someone trained to process hostile situations. The glass pattern suggested blunt force trauma from multiple impacts. The fragments were scattered in a way that indicated the attackers had stood on the driver's side, probably using rocks or bricks. She walked around the vehicle, noting that only the front windows were targeted. The back windows, mirrors, and paint job were untouched. This wasn't random vandalism, it was personal. Someone wanted to send a message. "Oh my God, Sarah." The voice belonged to Janet Rodriguez, the school librarian who just pulled into the adjacent parking space. "What happened to your car?" Sarah straightened, brushing glass dust from her hands. "Looks like someone had some fun last night." Janet's face showed the shock that Sarah's voice didn't. "We need to call the police and Principal Williams. This is terrible." "I'll handle it," Sarah said calmly, though her mind was already working through possibilities. In her military days, she'd learned that emotional reactions clouded judgment. Right now, she needs clarity. As other teachers began arriving and gathering around the crime scene, Sarah found herself thinking about the past few weeks. There had been incidents, small things that individually seemed like typical teenage mischief, but together formed a pattern. 3 weeks ago, someone had written "Army bitch" on her classroom whiteboard in permanent marker. She'd cleaned it off without reporting it, assuming it was just a student testing boundaries. 2 weeks later, her car tires had been deflated, not slashed, just deflated. Again, she'd handled it quietly, inflating them at the gas station. Down the street. Last week, she'd found her classroom door superglued shut. The custodian had to remove the entire handle to get it open. Sarah had begun to suspect these weren't random acts, but she'd hoped ignoring them would make them stop. Clearly, she'd been wrong. Principal Williams arrived within minutes, his face grave as he surveyed the damage. Robert Williams was a decent man in his 50s who'd been running Jefferson High for nearly a decade. He prided himself on maintaining order, and this kind of destruction on school property was exactly the type of incident that kept him awake at night. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he said, genuinely distressed. "We'll get to the bottom of this. I'm calling the police right now." Sarah nodded, but her attention was drawn to something else. Across the parking lot, near the student drop-off area, she noticed a group of 5 teenagers clustered around a red pickup truck. They were pretending to be engaged in normal conversation, but Sarah's trained eye caught the way they kept glancing toward the commotion around her car. She recognized them immediately. The leader was Tyler Brennan, a senior who'd been in her chemistry class the previous year. He was the type of student who thought rules were suggestions and authority was something to be challenged. Tall and athletic, with the kind of confidence that came from never facing real consequences, Tyler had a way of making teachers' lives difficult without technically crossing lines that would result in suspension. Standing next to him was Marcus Webb, Tyler's best friend and constant companion. Marcus was shorter but more aggressive, the kind of kid who'd probably been in fights since elementary school. His academic record was a disaster, but he stayed on the football team because he was fast and mean. The other 3 were typical followers: Brad Sullivan, Kevin Hayes, and Danny Morrison. They weren't leaders, but they were eager to please Tyler and Marcus, which made them dangerous in their own right. Sarah had taught all of them at various points, and while none were particularly gifted students, they weren't stupid either. They were smart enough to cause problems without getting caught. As Sarah watched them, Tyler looked directly at her and smiled. Not a friendly smile, a cold, calculating expression that confirmed her suspicions. He said something to his friends, and they all laughed before getting into the truck and driving away. The police arrived 20 minutes later. Officer David Chen was a community liaison who'd worked with the school district for years. He was thorough and professional, taking photos and gathering statements from the teachers who'd witnessed the aftermath. "Any idea who might have done this?" Officer Chen asked as he finished documenting the scene. Sarah hesitated. In the military, you didn't make accusations without evidence. But she also knew that sometimes you had to trust your instincts. "I have suspicions, but nothing concrete." "Well, we'll dust for fingerprints and check with the neighbors. Someone might have security cameras that caught something." As the morning progressed and students began arriving for first period, Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being the center of attention. Word spread quickly through the school's social networks, and by lunchtime, everyone knew about the incident. What bothered Sarah most wasn't the damage to her car. Insurance would cover that. It was the message behind it. Someone was trying to intimidate her, to make her feel vulnerable and unsafe. In her military career, she'd faced actual enemies who wanted to kill her. A group of suburban teenagers trying to scare her was almost insulting. But Sarah also understood something these kids didn't. They'd made a crucial tactical error. By escalating from minor annoyances to property destruction, they'd crossed a line that would require a response. And if they thought they were dealing with a typical teacher who would file a report and hope for the best, they were about to learn otherwise. During her lunch break, Sarah sat in her empty classroom and made a decision. She wouldn't wait for the police investigation or depend on the school administration to handle this. She would take matters into her own hands. Not violently. She wasn't about to assault a group of teenagers. But she had skills and knowledge that these kids couldn't imagine. She'd been trained to gather intelligence, identify targets, and neutralize threats. The fact that this particular threat came from high school students instead of enemy combatants didn't change the fundamental approach. Sarah pulled out her phone and began making calls. Her first was to Lieutenant Colonel James Patterson, her former commanding officer who now worked in military intelligence. If she was going to run an operation, she wanted to do it right. Patterson here. James, it's Sarah Mitchell. I need some advice on a situation. Sarah, good to hear from you. What's going on? She explained the situation concisely, focusing on facts rather than emotions. Patterson listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she'd always appreciated about him. So you think it's these 5 kids? He asked when she finished. I'm 90% certain. The question is how to prove it and make sure it stops. Well, you know how we used to handle situations like this in the field. Gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, create leverage, neutralize the threat. The only difference is your targets are American teenagers instead of insurgents. That's what I was thinking, but I need to be careful. I can't exactly interrogate them. No, but you can investigate them. Find out what they care about, what they're afraid of, what they have to lose. Everyone has pressure points, Sarah, even 17-year-olds. After hanging up, Sarah felt the familiar surge of energy that came with having a mission. For the first time in 3 years, she was going to use her real skills again. The war had come to Jefferson High School, and Tyler Brennan had no idea what he'd started. Sarah's investigation began that very afternoon. While other teachers headed home to grade papers and prepare dinner, she remained in her classroom, transforming it into a makeshift intelligence headquarters. She'd requisitioned a large corkboard from the supply closet and began constructing what military personnel called a target analysis board. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. At the center, she placed printed photos of all 5 suspects that she'd downloaded from the school's yearbook database. Tyler Brennan's cocky smile stared back at her from the middle of the board, surrounded by the 4 accomplices. Using colored string, she began connecting dots between the individuals, marking relationships, shared classes, and extracurricular activities. Her first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Amy Jang, a quiet junior who served as a student aide during 6th period, knocked hesitantly on Sarah's classroom door. Ms. Mitchell, I heard about your car. I'm really sorry. Sarah looked up from her notes. Amy was one of those students who noticed everything but said little. In Sarah's experience, these were often the most valuable sources of information. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate that. Amy shifted nervously in the doorway. I know you probably can't do anything about it, but I saw Tyler Brennan and his friends at Hardware Plus yesterday after school. They were buying something from the tool section, and they kept laughing about teaching someone a lesson. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice calm. What time was this? Around 4:30. My mom was picking up paint, and I was waiting in the car. They had a bunch of stuff in a shopping cart, but I couldn't see what exactly. Did you notice which of them was paying? Marcus Webb. He had a wad of cash, which was weird because everyone knows his family doesn't have much money. After Amy left, Sarah made her first entry in what she designated as her operational log. Hardware Plus was 3 blocks from the school, and their security cameras would have captured the transaction. But she needed more than circumstantial evidence. Sarah's next move was to study her target's digital footprints. She'd learned cyber reconnaissance during her military service, and teenagers were notoriously careless about their online presence. Using the school's computer lab during her planning period, she began systematically reviewing their social media accounts. Tyler Brennan's Instagram revealed exactly what she'd expected: a cocky teenager documenting his life in carefully curated posts. Photos of him with his truck at football games and hanging out with friends. But it was his story posts that provided the real intelligence. Screenshots of text conversations where he bragged about putting teachers in their place and references to operations that needed to be kept quiet. Marcus Webb's Facebook was more revealing. His posts showed someone desperate for approval and willing to do anything to maintain his position in Tyler's inner circle. More importantly, his check-ins revealed a pattern of locations and timing that would be crucial for Sarah's planning. Brad Sullivan, Kevin Hayes, and Danny Morrison were followers, but their accounts showed they were active participants rather than reluctant accomplices. Their group chat screenshots, carelessly posted as inside jokes, contained references to previous incidents that Sarah now realized had been coordinated attacks on other teachers. The picture that emerged was troubling. This wasn't just a group of kids picking on Sarah. It was an organized campaign of harassment that had been going on for months, targeting multiple faculty members. Sarah found references to incidents involving Mrs. Peterson from the English department, Mr. Johnson from the gym, and at least 3 substitute teachers who'd simply stopped coming to Jefferson High. Sarah's military training had taught her that successful operations required understanding your enemy's capabilities, intentions, and vulnerabilities. She was beginning to understand the first 2, but the third required more direct observation. The next morning, Sarah arrived at school 45 minutes early and positioned herself in the second-floor faculty lounge, which provided a clear view of the student parking lot. She'd brought a thermos of coffee and a stack of chemistry tests to grade, creating the appearance of a teacher simply getting an early start on her day. Tyler's red pickup truck pulled into the lot at 7:45 a.m. Sarah watched through the window. As all 5 boys climbed out, their body language relaxed and confident. They clearly felt untouchable, which was exactly the kind of overconfidence that led to tactical mistakes. She observed their morning routine for the next week. Tyler and Marcus always arrived together, picking up the other 3 from different locations around town. They had a regular spot near the gymnasium where they congregated before first period, and their conversations were loud enough to be overheard by anyone who cared to listen. On Thursday morning, Sarah's patience was rewarded. Positioning herself near the guidance office, she was able to hear Tyler bragging to a group of underclassmen about his psychological warfare against teachers who didn't know their place. "You gotta be smart about it," Tyler was saying. "You can't just go in guns blazing. You start small, see how they react, then you escalate. Most of these teachers are soft. They'll fold after a couple of incidents." Marcus laughed. "Mitchell's tougher than most, but even she's starting to crack. Did you see her face when she found her car?" "That's just the beginning," Tyler replied. "By the time we're done with her, she'll be begging for a transfer." Sarah made detailed notes of the conversation, including exact quotes and timestamps. This was the kind of evidence that would be useful later, but she needed more than just overheard conversations. Her breakthrough came from an unexpected source. During her lunch break on Friday, Sarah was approached by Rachel Torres, a senior who'd been in her advanced placement chemistry class the previous semester. "Miss Mitchell, can I talk to you privately?" They walked to Sarah's empty classroom, where Rachel closed the door behind them. "I know who trashed your car," Rachel said without preamble. "And I know you probably suspect Tyler and his crew, but I have proof." Sarah's heart rate increased, but she maintained her calm exterior. "What kind of proof?" Rachel pulled out her phone and showed Sarah a video. The timestamp showed it was recorded at 11:30 p.m. on the night Sarah's car was vandalized. The footage was grainy and shot from a distance, but it clearly showed 5 figures in the Jefferson High parking lot, systematically destroying the windows of a Honda Civic with rocks and what appeared to be a baseball bat. "How did you get this?" Sarah asked. "I was coming home from my job at the movie theater. I saw Tyler's truck parked on Maple Street, which is weird because he lives in the opposite direction. I got curious and decided to see what they were doing. I recorded it from across the street." Sarah studied the video carefully. The lighting was poor, but she could make out distinctive clothing and body language that matched her observations of the 5 suspects. More importantly, the video showed the license plate of Tyler's truck. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked. Rachel's expression hardened. "Because Tyler and his friends think they run this school, and they're making everyone's life miserable. Last month, they started a rumor that I was cheating on tests, and it almost cost me my scholarship applications. When I tried to defend myself, they made my life hell for 2 weeks. Why didn't you report this to the administration?" "Because Tyler's dad is on the school board, and Marcus's uncle is the assistant principal at the middle school. They have connections, and they know how to work the system. But you're different. You're not going to just file a report and hope for the best." Sarah realized that Rachel had been observing her just as carefully as she'd been observing her targets. The girl had correctly identified that Sarah was planning some kind of response. "What makes you think that?" "Because you're former military, and you don't back down from fights. I've seen how you handle disruptive students. You don't get emotional, you just solve the problem. These guys have been terrorizing teachers for months, and nobody's done anything about it. But you're going to, aren't you?" Sarah looked at the young woman across from her desk. Rachel was intelligent, observant, and clearly frustrated with the system's inability to deal with Tyler's group. She was also offering Sarah exactly what she needed: concrete evidence of criminal activity. "If I were to take action," Sarah said carefully, "what would you expect in return?" "I want them stopped. Not just suspended for a few days, but actually stopped. I want them to understand that actions have consequences, and I want other kids to see that bullies can be beaten." Sarah made a decision that would have been impossible in her military career, but was perfectly legal in civilian life. She was going to recruit an asset. "Rachel, I need you to understand something. If you're going to help me with this, you need to follow my lead exactly. No improvisation, no going off script. Can you do that?" Rachel nodded eagerly. "What do you need me to do?" "First, I need you to send me that video. Then, I need you to keep your eyes and ears open. If Tyler or his friends plan anything else, I want to know about it immediately. Can you do that without putting yourself at risk?" "Absolutely." As Rachel left her classroom, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful recruitment. She now had evidence, intelligence, and a source inside the student body. The next phase of her operation could begin. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing everything she'd gathered. She had video evidence of the crime, documented patterns of harassment, and detailed profiles of her targets. More importantly, she was beginning to understand their vulnerabilities. Tyler's weakness was his ego and his need to be seen as a leader. Marcus was desperate for approval and would likely crumble under pressure. The other 3 were followers who could be separated from the group with the right approach. Sarah opened her laptop and began typing her operational plan. In the military, she'd learned that successful missions required careful preparation, clear objectives, and precise execution. Her objective was simple: neutralize the threat posed by Tyler, Brennan, and his accomplices while teaching them a lesson they'd never forget. She titled her document, Operation Classroom Management, and began outlining her strategy. Phase 1 would involve gathering additional intelligence and building her case. Phase 2 would be psychological pressure designed to create cracks in their group dynamic. Phase 3 would be the application of decisive force, not physical violence, but something far more devastating to teenagers: the complete destruction of their social standing and future prospects. Sarah smiled as she worked. Tyler Brennan thought he was fighting a high school chemistry teacher. He had no idea he was about to face a combat veteran who'd spent 5 years neutralizing threats in hostile territory. The real war was about to begin. Sarah's first strike came on a Monday morning, executed with the precision of a surgical operation. She'd spent the weekend analyzing her target's class schedules, identifying pressure points, and preparing her opening move. The beauty of psychological warfare was that your enemy often defeated themselves once you planted the right seeds of doubt. Tyler Brennan strutted into first-period American history with his usual swagger, sliding into his back row seat next to Marcus Webb. What he didn't expect was to find a manila envelope waiting on his desk, with his name typed across the front in block letters. Inside was a single photograph, a grainy still frame from Rachel's video showing 5 figures vandalizing a car in the Jefferson High parking lot. No note, no explanation, just the image and a timestamp, 11:30 p.m. The exact night Sarah's windows were destroyed. Tyler's face went pale as he studied the photo. His hands trembled slightly as he showed it to Marcus, who immediately began looking around the classroom as if the photographer might be lurking in the corners. "Where did this come from?" Marcus whispered. "I don't know," Tyler replied, his voice lacking its usual confidence. "But somebody was watching us." What Tyler didn't know was that Sarah had positioned herself strategically in the hallway, observing his reaction through the classroom's window. She'd learned in military intelligence that the first rule of psychological operations was to let your enemy's imagination do most of the work. The photograph raised questions but provided no answers, leaving Tyler to wonder who had taken it, how much they knew, and what they planned to do with the information. 20 minutes later, Brad Sullivan found an identical envelope in his second-period locker. By lunch, Kevin Hayes and Danny Morrison had received theirs as well. Each envelope contained the same photograph, but Sarah had added a personal touch. She'd circled each individual figure in red ink, as if identifying specific targets. The group's usual confident demeanor cracked immediately. Instead of their typical loud conversations in the hallway, they huddled together in nervous whispers, constantly looking over their shoulders. Sarah watched from her classroom window as they gathered near the gymnasium, their body language tense and paranoid. "This is bad," she heard Brad say as they passed her open door. "What if they go to the cops?" "They can't prove anything from a blurry photo," Tyler replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Sarah's second psychological strike came that afternoon. She discovered through her intelligence gathering that Marcus Webb was failing 3 of his 5 classes and desperately needed to pass chemistry to graduate. His academic advisor, Mrs. Henderson, had mentioned in the faculty meeting that Marcus was 1 semester away from being held back. Sarah crafted a carefully worded email to Marcus's mother, copying Principal Williams and the guidance counselor. The subject line read, "Academic intervention required, Marcus Webb." The email was professionally written and expressed concern about Marcus's recent decline in performance, specifically noting his increased absences and distracted behavior during class. Sarah mentioned that she'd observed Marcus associating with students who had been involved in disciplinary incidents and suggested that his academic struggles might be connected to poor social choices. She never directly accused Marcus of anything, but the timing and phrasing created clear implications. When Mrs. Webb received the email, she immediately called the school demanding a meeting with her son and his teachers. Marcus found himself sitting in the principal's office at 3:30 p.m., facing his mother, Principal Williams, and Sarah herself. Mrs. Webb was a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her 3 children, and she had no tolerance for behavior that might jeopardize her son's education. "Marcus, Ms. Mitchell says you've been distracted and missing assignments. She's concerned about the kids you're hanging around with. What's going on?" Marcus squirmed in his chair, acutely aware that Sarah was watching him with the same calm intensity she brought to her chemistry lessons. He couldn't tell his mother about the photograph without admitting to vandalism, but he also couldn't explain his recent behavior without revealing the truth. "I don't know what she's talking about," Marcus mumbled. "I've been fine." Sarah leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, I've noticed you seem anxious lately. Is there something you'd like to share?" Sometimes students get involved in situations that seem manageable at first, but then escalate beyond their control. The words were carefully chosen. To his mother and Principal Williams, Sarah sounded like a concerned teacher offering support. To Marcus, she sounded like someone who knew exactly what he'd done and was offering him a chance to confess. Marcus's resolve cracked. I've been stressed about graduation, that's all. Well, you need to get your priorities straight, Mrs. Webb said firmly. You're going to come straight home after school every day this week, and you're going to catch up on all your missing assignments. No truck, no friends, no nothing until your grades improve. As the meeting ended, Sarah caught Marcus's eye and gave him a barely perceptible nod. The message was clear. This was just the beginning. Sarah's third move targeted Tyler's greatest vulnerability, his reputation. She'd learned from her digital reconnaissance that Tyler prided himself on being seen as a leader and rebel, someone who could outsmart authority figures. His social media was full of posts about not letting anyone push you around and standing up to the system. Sarah decided to use this image against him. During her lunch break, she visited the school's main office and requested a meeting with Tyler's academic advisor, Mr. Patterson. She brought with her a folder containing Tyler's recent test scores, assignment completion rates, and participation grades. I'm concerned about Tyler's recent academic performance, Sarah began. His grades have been declining, and I've noticed he seems distracted during class. I'm wondering if there might be external pressures affecting his schoolwork. Mr. Patterson reviewed the documents as Sarah had prepared. His grades aren't terrible, but you're right that there's been a downward trend. What kind of external pressures are you thinking about? I've observed that Tyler seems to be spending a lot of energy trying to maintain a certain social image. He appears to be more focused on being seen as a leader among his peers than on his academic responsibilities. I'm wondering if he might benefit from some additional structure or mentorship. Sarah's suggestion was subtle but effective. Mr. Patterson agreed to schedule a meeting with Tyler's parents to discuss leadership opportunities and academic focus. The meeting was framed as a positive intervention, but Tyler would know it was really about his behavior. More importantly, Sarah had planted seeds of doubt about Tyler's leadership abilities by suggesting he was struggling to balance his social image with academic performance. She was undermining the very foundation of his power within the group. The psychological pressure began to show results immediately. Tyler's friends started questioning his judgment, wondering if his need to prove himself was putting them all at risk. The group's unity, which had been their greatest strength, started to fracture. Sarah's fourth operation was her most sophisticated yet. She'd identified that the group's communication relied heavily on a group chat where they coordinated their activities and shared information. Using her knowledge of teenage social dynamics, she decided to create internal conflict within their digital space. She couldn't directly access their group chat, but she could influence it. Through Rachel Torres, she learned that Tyler's ex-girlfriend, Jessica Martinez, still had access to information about his activities through mutual friends. Jessica had her own reasons for wanting to cause Tyler problems. He'd spread rumors about her after their breakup. 6 months earlier, Sarah approached Jessica with a carefully crafted proposal. She didn't ask Jessica to do anything illegal or unethical, just to share information that was already circulating among students. Specifically, she wanted to know if Tyler was planning any new pranks or operations against teachers. I'm not trying to get him in serious trouble, Sarah explained during a conversation after school. I just want to be prepared. If I know what's coming, I can protect myself and other teachers. Jessica was eager to help. He's been bragging about some big plan for this weekend. Something about showing Mitchell who's boss and making her pay for whatever's been making him paranoid lately. Do you know any details? Not specifics, but Marcus was asking around about where you live. And Danny Morrison's been talking about taking things to the next level after school hours. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The escalation from school-based harassment to targeting her home, crossed a line that changed everything. In military terms, they were expanding the theater of operations into civilian territory. "Jessica, I need you to do something for me. If you hear any specific plans about this weekend, I want you to text me immediately. Can you do that?" "Absolutely." Tyler thinks he's so smart, but he's about to learn that actions have consequences. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment making final preparations for the weekend. She'd installed additional security cameras around her building, informed her neighbors about potential mischief, and arranged for her car to be parked in a secure garage several blocks away. But more importantly, she'd prepared a trap. Sarah had learned that the best way to catch your enemy was to give them exactly what they thought they wanted, then use their confidence against them. If Tyler and his friends were planning to escalate their harassment to her home, she would be ready. She pulled out her laptop and began typing a detailed report of everything she'd observed, documented, and recorded over the past 2 weeks. The report included video evidence from Rachel, time-stamped observations of the group's behavior, copies of the threatening social media posts, and documentation of the escalating pattern of harassment. The report would go to Principal Williams, the police, and the school board on Monday morning. But first, she wanted to give Tyler one final chance to make a mistake that would eliminate any doubt about his guilt. Sarah smiled as she reviewed her preparations. Tyler Brennan thought he was hunting a helpless teacher. What he didn't realize was that he'd been walking into a carefully constructed trap from the moment he'd decided to target her. The prey was about to become the predator, and Tyler was about to learn what happened when you declared war on someone who actually knew how to fight one. Friday afternoon arrived with an unseasonable warmth that had students eager for the weekend. Sarah maintained her normal routine, staying after school to grade papers and prepare for Monday's lessons. But unlike every other Friday, she was acutely aware that this weekend would determine the outcome of her carefully orchestrated campaign. At exactly 4:30 p.m., Jessica Martinez appeared at Sarah's classroom door with urgent news. "Ms. Mitchell, they're definitely planning something for tonight. I overheard Tyler on the phone with someone, and he kept saying midnight and her apartment complex. Marcus was asking about whether you have security cameras, and Danny Morrison borrowed his cousin's motorcycle so they'd have 2 vehicles." Sarah nodded calmly, though internally she felt the familiar pre-mission focus settling over her. "Did you hear anything about what specifically they're planning?" Tyler mentioned something about making sure she gets the message and personal property destruction. He also said something weird about making you understand your place in the food chain. "Jessica, I want you to go home and stay home tonight. Whatever happens, I don't want you anywhere near this situation. Understood?" After Jessica left, Sarah began implementing the final phase of her operational plan. She sent a text message to Rachel Torres. "Plan active tonight. Stay home and maintain a communications blackout until Sunday." Then she made a call to her apartment complex's security office. "Hi, this is Sarah Mitchell in Building C, Apartment 2B. I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the additional security measures for this weekend." The voice on the other end belonged to Tom Bradley, the head of security whom Sarah had befriended over the past week. "Everything's in place, Ms. Mitchell. We've got extra patrols scheduled, and the new camera system is fully operational." "Are you still planning to be away for the weekend?" "That's correct. I'll be staying at my sister's place in Ann Arbor, but I wanted to make sure you had my cell number in case anything unusual happens." Sarah's sister in Ann Arbor was actually a cover story. She would be spending the night in the security office itself, monitoring the situation through the building's camera system. Tom Bradley was a retired Marine who'd quickly understood the situation when Sarah had explained it to him earlier in the week. "Don't worry, ma'am. If anyone tries anything funny around your building tonight, we'll be ready for them." At 6 p.m., Sarah made a show of leaving her apartment building, carrying an overnight bag and driving her rental car toward the highway. She'd positioned herself so that anyone watching would see her departure and assume she was gone for the weekend. What they didn't see was Sarah parking 3 blocks away and walking back to the building through a rear entrance that connected to the underground parking garage. By 7 p.m., she was settled in the security office with Tom Bradley, watching multiple camera feeds that covered every angle of the property. "Military, huh?" Tom asked as they settled in for the night watch. "Army. Intelligence. 5 years overseas before I decided teaching was a safer career option." Tom chuckled. "Funny how trouble finds us anyway. These kids have no idea what they're walking into, do they? They're about to get an education in tactical planning." The hours passed slowly. Sarah and Tom took turns monitoring the cameras while the other rested. At 11:45 p.m., Tom spotted movement on the perimeter cameras. "We've got activity on the north side. Looks like a red pickup truck parked on Elm Street." Sarah joined him at the monitor bank. Through the night vision cameras, they could see Tyler's truck positioned where it had a clear view of the apartment, complex but remained partially hidden behind a line of trees. "Count 5 individuals," Tom reported. "They're gearing up for something." Sarah watched as the 5 figures emerged from the truck and began moving toward her building. They were dressed in dark clothing and carried backpacks that likely contained their vandalism supplies. Tyler led the group, with Marcus close behind and the other 3 following in a loose formation. "They're heading for the parking garage," Sarah observed. "Probably planning to target my car and then move to the apartment. Should I call the police now?" "Not yet. I want them fully committed to the crime before we spring the trap." The group reached the parking garage entrance where Tyler produced what appeared to be a crowbar to force open the security door. Sarah had anticipated this and had Tom temporarily disable the electronic lock while leaving the backup security measures in place. "Smart kids," Tom muttered. They disabled the overhead lighting. But Tyler's group hadn't accounted for the infrared cameras that provided crystal clear footage even in complete darkness. Sarah watched as they moved through the garage, searching for her Honda Civic. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing to Sarah's parking space. "That's her car." What the boys found was Sarah's car parked exactly where it always was, seemingly unprotected and vulnerable. They couldn't see the additional cameras that had been installed specifically to capture this moment, or the pressure plates beneath the concrete that would record their exact positions. Tyler pulled out a spray paint can and began writing "Army Bitch" across the driver's side door while Marcus used a knife to slash the front tires. Brad and Kevin worked on the rear of the vehicle, using markers to write additional obscenities. Across the back window, Danny Morrison served as the lookout, but his attention was focused on the garage entrance rather than the ceiling-mounted cameras that were recording everything in high definition. "Phase 1 complete," Sarah reported to Tom. "Now we wait for Phase 2. After finishing with the car, the group moved toward the building's main entrance. Tyler had somehow obtained a resident access code, probably through social engineering or observing other tenants. Sarah made a mental note to recommend security improvements after this incident was resolved. The boys took the elevator to the 2nd floor, where Sarah's apartment was located. She watched through the hallway cameras as they approached her door, their confidence growing with each successful step of their operation. Tyler produced a large garbage bag filled with what appeared to be rotting food and animal waste. "This is going right in front of her door," he whispered. "She'll smell it the second she gets home." Marcus had brought glass bottles filled with a liquid that Sarah suspected was urine. "These go on her welcome mat. Let's see how welcome she feels after this." But the piece de resistance was Danny Morrison's contribution, a can of industrial adhesive that he began spreading across Sarah's door handle and keyhole. "She won't be getting into her apartment without calling a locksmith," he said with obvious satisfaction. "Perfect," Sarah murmured. "Property destruction?" harassment, and criminal mischief. That should be enough charge to make this stick. Tom reached for his radio. Want me to call it in now? Wait 30 more seconds. I want them to think they've gotten away with it. The group finished their vandalism and began retreating toward the stairwell, their movements now rushed and excited. They thought they'd successfully executed their revenge against the teacher who'd dared to stand up to them. They had no idea they just provided law enforcement with a complete video record of multiple felony crimes. As the boys reached the parking garage, Tom Bradley made his call. This is security at Riverside Commons. We need police units for a break-in in progress. 5 suspects currently in the building, caught on camera committing vandalism and criminal mischief. Sarah added her own call to the police. This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm the victim of an ongoing harassment campaign, and the perpetrators are currently vandalizing my apartment building. I have video evidence of the crimes in progress. The response was swift. Police units surrounded the apartment complex within minutes, cutting off all exit routes before Tyler's group could escape. The boys emerged from the parking garage to find themselves facing half a dozen police officers with weapons drawn. Nobody moves, hands where we can see them. Tyler's face went white as he realized they'd walked into a perfect trap. Marcus immediately began crying, while Brad, Kevin, and Danny looked around desperately for an escape route that didn't exist. Tyler Brennan, Marcus Webb, Brad Sullivan, Kevin Hayes, and Danny Morrison, Officer David Chun announced as he approached the group. You're all under arrest for breaking and entering, vandalism, criminal mischief, and harassment. As the handcuffs were applied, Sarah emerged from the building with Tom Bradley and a complete digital record of the night's events. The footage showed every moment of the crime, from the initial break-in to the vandalism of both her car and apartment. Ms. Mitchell, Officer Chun said as he supervised the arrests. I understand you have additional evidence related to this case. Sarah handed him a flash drive containing not just the night's footage, but the complete intelligence file she'd compiled over the past 2 weeks. Video evidence of tonight's crimes, the original car vandalism, social media posts documenting their harassment campaign, and witness statements from multiple students. Tyler looked up from the police car where he was being held. You set us up. This was all planned. Sarah met his gaze with the same calm expression she'd worn during her military deployments. You declared war on the wrong person, Tyler. I just used better tactics. As the police cars pulled away with their prisoners, Sarah felt the satisfaction of a successful mission. But she knew the real battle was just beginning. Now came the legal proceedings, the school disciplinary hearings, and the long-term consequences that would reshape these young men's lives. Tyler Brennan had wanted to teach Sarah Mitchell her place in the food chain. Instead, he was about to learn his own place in a much larger ecosystem where actions truly had consequences. The hunt was over. The reckoning had begun. The phone calls began at 6:30 a.m. Saturday morning. Sarah was in her kitchen, preparing coffee and reviewing the police report from the previous night's arrests, when her cell phone started ringing with calls from angry parents who just bailed their sons out of jail. The first call came from Richard Brennan, Tyler's father and member of the Jefferson High School board. His voice carried the entitled fury of a man accustomed to making problems disappear through influence and intimidation. Ms. Mitchell, this is Richard Brennan. I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but having my son arrested for a harmless prank is completely unacceptable. We need to meet immediately to resolve this situation. Sarah's military training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, especially when dealing with hostile individuals who expected intimidation to work. Mr. Brennan, your son was arrested for multiple felonies including breaking and entering, vandalism, and criminal harassment. This wasn't a prank, it was a coordinated criminal enterprise. Criminal enterprise? You're talking about teenage boys who made a mistake. I've already spoken with Principal Williams. and we're prepared to offer a settlement that will make this whole thing go away. I'm not interested in settlements, Mr. Brennan. Your son and his friends have been terrorizing faculty members for months. Last night's incident was simply the culmination of a pattern of escalating criminal behavior." The line went quiet for a moment before Richard Brennan's voice returned, colder and more threatening. "Ms. Mitchell, I think you need to understand something. I have significant influence in this school district. If you insist on pursuing this matter, I can make your career very difficult." Sarah smiled, recognizing the tactical error. In the military, she'd learned that people who led with threats were usually operating from a position of weakness. "Mr. Brennan, are you threatening my employment because I reported crimes committed against me?" "I'm simply explaining the reality of the situation." "Then let me explain mine. I have recordings of this conversation, and threatening a crime victim's employment constitutes witness intimidation under Michigan state law. Would you like me to add that to the charges I'm filing?" The line went dead immediately. The second call came 20 minutes later from Detective Lavra Hayes of the county prosecutor's office. Unlike the angry parents, Detective Hayes was professional and thorough in her approach. "Ms. Mitchell, I've reviewed the evidence package you provided last night, and I have to say it's one of the most comprehensive cases I've seen in years. The video footage is crystal clear, and your documentation of the harassment pattern is exceptional. Thank you, Detective. I wanted to make sure there were no questions about what happened. There aren't. We're proceeding with formal charges against all 5 defendants: breaking and entering, vandalism, criminal harassment, conspiracy, and criminal mischief. Given their ages and the fact that this appears to be their first serious offense, they'll likely be tried as juveniles, but the charges are serious enough that they're looking at significant consequences." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. What kind of consequences? Juvenile detention, mandatory community service, restitution for damages, and permanent criminal records. More importantly, these charges will likely affect their college applications, scholarships, and future employment opportunities. The third call came from Principal Williams, who sounded exhausted and stressed. "Sarah, I need you to come in this morning. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." When Sarah arrived at Jefferson High at 10 a.m., she found the administrative offices in chaos. Richard Brennan was there with 2 other school board members, along with 4 sets of parents demanding that the charges be dropped and their sons reinstated immediately. "Ms. Mitchell," Principal Williams said as she entered his office, "these parents are claiming that you entrapped their children and that the arrests were illegitimate." Sarah looked around the room at the assembled parents and school officials. These were people accustomed to having their influence solve problems, and they clearly expected her to be intimidated by their collective pressure. Principal Williams: "Entrapment is when law enforcement induces someone to commit a crime they wouldn't otherwise commit. These students planned and executed their attack entirely on their own initiative. All I did was ensure that their crimes were properly documented." Richard Brennan stood up aggressively. "You set up cameras. You coordinated with building security. This was a setup from the beginning. Mr. Brennan, your son and his friends have been committing crimes for weeks. Installing security measures to protect myself from further attacks isn't entrapment. It's self-defense." Mrs. Webb, Marcus's mother, spoke up with tears in her eyes. "Miss Mitchell, these boys made a mistake, but they don't deserve to have their futures ruined over this. Can't we work something out?" Sarah felt a moment of sympathy for Mrs. Webb, who, unlike the other parents, seemed genuinely remorseful rather than simply angry about getting caught. But she also remembered the pattern of harassment that had affected multiple teachers and students. "Mrs. Webb, I understand you're concerned about your son's future. But Marcus and his friends weren't just targeting me. They've been systematically harassing faculty members and intimidating other students for months. This behavior escalated to the point where they were breaking into buildings and destroying property. At what point would it have been serious enough to warrant consequences? The room fell silent as the weight of Sarah's words sank in. These parents had been so focused on protecting their children from consequences that they'd never considered the impact of their actions on others. That Principal Williams cleared his throat. In addition to the criminal charges, the school district will be conducting its own disciplinary review. Given the severity of the incidents and the fact that they occurred on school property, we're looking at suspension and possible expulsion. For all 5 students, you can't do that. Richard Brennan exploded. These boys are seniors. You'd be destroying their graduation and college plans over a misunderstanding. Sarah pulled out a folder containing printouts of social media posts, witness statements, and her documented timeline of harassment incidents. Mr. Brennan, this wasn't a misunderstanding. Your son organized a systematic campaign of harassment and intimidation. He bragged about it online, recruited others to participate, and escalated to serious property crimes when his initial tactics didn't work. She placed the evidence on Principal Williams' desk where all the parents could see it. Tyler posted on Instagram about putting teachers in their place. Marcus documented their planning sessions on Facebook. The other boys shared screenshots of their group chat where they discussed targeting multiple faculty members. As the parents reviewed the evidence, their expressions shifted from anger to shock to resignation. The documentation was overwhelming and undeniable. Mrs. Sullivan, Brad's mother, looked up from the papers with a stricken expression. I had no idea it was this organized. I thought they were just being boys. Mrs. Sullivan, Sarah replied gently, the boys will be boys excuse stops working when the behavior involves criminal activity. Your sons are 18 years old. Legal adults who made conscious decisions to commit serious crimes. The meeting continued for another hour, but the outcome was inevitable. The evidence was too comprehensive, the crimes too serious, and the pattern too well documented for any kind of cover-up or dismissal. By noon, all 5 students had been formally suspended, pending the criminal proceedings and school disciplinary hearings. Their participation in graduation ceremonies was suspended. Their college applications would include notation of pending criminal charges, and their athletic scholarships were under review. As the parents filed out of the principal's office, Richard Brennan made one final attempt at intimidation. This isn't over, Ms. Mitchell. You've made powerful enemies today. Sarah met his gaze with the same calm confidence she'd displayed throughout the crisis. Mr. Brennan, your son declared war on me 3 weeks ago. I simply won it using superior tactics and better intelligence. If you want to continue this conflict, I suggest you review how the first round ended before deciding on your next move. That afternoon, Sarah returned to her apartment to assess the damage from the previous night's attack. The building's maintenance crew had already cleaned up the mess and replaced her door locks, but the smell of the rotting garbage still lingered in the hallway. Tom Bradley met her at the elevator with a security report. Insurance adjusters will be here Monday to assess the damage to your car. The good news is that everything was caught on camera, so there won't be any questions about the claims. What's the total damage? About $3,000 to your vehicle, another $500 for the building cleanup and lock replacement, plus the cost of the additional security measures we installed. Sarah nodded. The financial damage was significant but manageable. More importantly, the psychological warfare that had disrupted her life for weeks was finally over. As she settled into her cleaned apartment that evening, Sarah reflected on the past month's events. She'd used skills learned in military service to solve a civilian problem, but the core principles remained the same. Gather intelligence, identify vulnerabilities, plan carefully, and execute decisively. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Rachel Torres. Heard about the arrests. The whole school is talking about it. Tyler's reputation is destroyed, and people are finally realizing what he was really like. Thank you for stopping them." Sarah smiled as she typed her response. "Sometimes bullies need to learn that their victims might be better at the game than they are." The war was over. Sarah Mitchell had won completely, and Tyler Brennan's dreams of intimidating a military veteran had been crushed, more thoroughly than he could have ever imagined. 3 months after the arrests, Sarah Mitchell stood before her advanced chemistry class, watching her students work through a complex molecular bonding experiment. The spring semester at Jefferson High had transformed dramatically since the night Tyler Brennan and his accomplices learned the hard way that some prey fights back. The morning sun streamed through windows that Tyler would never again darken with his presence. He'd been expelled permanently after pleading guilty to multiple felony charges in juvenile court. His college acceptance to Michigan State had been revoked. His football scholarship disappeared, and he'd been sentenced to 6 months in juvenile detention, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and 500 hours of community service. The ripple effects of that night had spread far beyond the 5 arrested students. Within weeks of the incident, 3 more teachers had come forward with evidence of harassment campaigns they'd endured in silence. Mrs. Peterson from English revealed that her car had been vandalized twice, but she'd never reported it out of fear of retaliation. Mr. Johnson, the gym teacher, disclosed that someone had been spreading false rumors about him on social media for months. 2 substitute teachers provided statements about incidents that had driven them away from Jefferson High entirely. The scope of the harassment network shocked even Sarah. Tyler's group hadn't just been targeting her. They'd been running what amounted to a reign of terror against faculty members they perceived as weak or vulnerable. The investigation revealed a sophisticated operation involving fake social media accounts, coordinated vandalism, and psychological intimidation tactics that had been driving experienced teachers away from the school. Detective Hayes had described it as the most organized juvenile criminal enterprise she'd encountered in 15 years of law enforcement. The prosecutor's office used the case as a model for addressing cyberbullying and institutional harassment, with Sarah's documentation methods being taught to other law enforcement agencies across the state. Marcus Webb's fate had been perhaps the most tragic. Unlike Tyler, who'd maintained his arrogance even after conviction, Marcus had broken down completely during his court hearing. His mother's tearful testimony about working 2 jobs to support her 3 children had moved even the judge, but the evidence was too overwhelming for leniency. Marcus received the same detention sentence as Tyler, but his path afterward diverged sharply. While Tyler's family hired expensive lawyers and tried to minimize the damage, Mrs. Webb used the crisis as a wake-up call. She enrolled Marcus in counseling, transferred him to a strict military-style boarding school for his final semester, and made him get a part-time job to help pay restitution to his victims. The transformation in Marcus had been remarkable. He'd written Sarah a 5-page handwritten letter of apology that demonstrated genuine remorse and understanding of how his actions had affected others. Unlike Tyler's court-mandated apology, which had been written by his lawyer, Marcus's letter showed real introspection and growth. Brad Sullivan, Kevin Hayes, and Danny Morrison had fared better than their leaders, primarily because their families had responded more appropriately to the crisis. All 3 had been suspended for the remainder of their senior year, but were allowed to complete their studies through an alternative education program. They'd graduate with their class, but their permanent records would carry notations of the criminal convictions. More importantly, all 3 had been required to participate in restorative justice programs that brought them face-to-face with the teachers they'd targeted. Sarah had participated in one of these sessions, watching as Brad Sullivan struggled to explain his actions to Mrs. Peterson, whose English class he'd disrupted for months. "I don't know why I did it," Brad had said, tears streaming down his face. "Tyler made it seem like it was just fun, like we were proving something. I never thought about how scared you must have been." Mrs. Peterson's response had been gracious but firm. Brad, you're 18 years old. You're old enough to know the difference between right and wrong. The fact that someone else suggested it doesn't excuse your choice to participate. These sessions had been more effective than any formal punishment in driving home the human cost of their actions. Seeing their victims as real people rather than abstract targets had forced the boys to confront the reality of what they'd done. The impact on Jefferson High's culture had been profound. Principal Williams had implemented new anti-harassment policies based on Sarah's recommendations, including mandatory reporting procedures for faculty intimidation and anonymous tip systems for students to report bullying. The school board had also instituted regular training sessions on recognizing and addressing systematic harassment. Most significantly, the student body itself had changed. Tyler's arrest had shattered the myth of his invincibility and inspired other students to speak out against bullying. Rachel Torres had organized a student committee focused on creating a safer school environment, and Jessica Martinez had started a peer counseling program for students dealing with harassment. The transformation wasn't complete. Institutional change took time, but the message was clear. Actions had consequences, and the old system of intimidation through influence was no longer viable. Sarah's reputation among students had evolved as well. The story of how she'd systematically dismantled Tyler's operation had spread throughout the school, but not in the way she'd expected. Rather than being feared, she'd become something of a folk hero among students who'd been victims of bullying. Themselves, Amanda Foster, a sophomore who'd been targeted by upperclassmen for being academically gifted, had approached Sarah after class one day with a request. "Ms. Mitchell, could you teach me how to document harassment the way you did? There are some girls who've been making my life miserable, and I want to be prepared if they escalate." Sarah had worked with Amanda to create a simple but effective documentation system, teaching her to save screenshots, record dates and times, and identify witnesses. When the harassment did escalate to cyberbullying, Amanda was ready with comprehensive evidence that led to swift disciplinary action. Word of Sarah's willingness to help students protect themselves had spread quietly through the school. She'd become an unofficial resource for kids dealing with bullying, teaching them strategies that went far beyond the typical "just ignore them" advice. The skills she'd learned in military intelligence, observation, documentation, pattern recognition, and strategic thinking proved remarkably applicable to civilian harassment situations. Students learned to think like investigators, gathering evidence and building cases rather than simply enduring abuse. The legal proceedings had finally concluded 6 weeks ago with the last of the civil lawsuits. Sarah had sued Tyler's family for damages, not because she needed the money, but because she wanted to establish a legal precedent that harassment campaigns had financial consequences for perpetrators and their families. The settlement had been substantial, enough to cover all her expenses plus punitive damages that would follow Tyler for years. More importantly, the civil case had required Tyler's family to acknowledge publicly that their son's actions were criminal rather than pranks, destroying their narrative of victimhood. Richard Brennan's threats about using his school board influence had backfired spectacularly. The board had voted to censure him for attempting to interfere with a criminal investigation, and he'd been forced to resign his position. His business had also suffered as word spread about his attempt to intimidate a crime victim. Several major clients had terminated their contracts, citing concerns about his ethics and judgment. The irony wasn't lost on Sarah. Tyler's father had tried to destroy her career and ended up destroying his own reputation instead. On this particular morning, as Sarah watched her students work through their chemistry experiments, she reflected on the broader lessons of the past few months. The incident had taught her that military skills translated to civilian life in unexpected ways, but it had also reinforced the importance of standing up to bullies, regardless of their perceived power. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Lieutenant Colonel Patterson. Saw the news article about your harassment case being used as a model for other school districts. Outstanding work, Sergeant. You've accomplished more with a chemistry textbook than most people do with a rifle. Sarah smiled at the message. The case had indeed become a model, featured in educational journals and law enforcement publications, as an example of how victims could use systematic documentation and strategic thinking to defeat organized harassment. Campaigns. She'd been invited to speak at 3 different conferences about her experience, sharing her methods with other educators and law enforcement professionals. The presentations focused on practical tactics, how to recognize organized harassment, methods for gathering evidence, and strategies for building comprehensive cases that couldn't be dismissed or minimized. But the real victory wasn't the recognition or the legal precedents. It was the change in Jefferson High's culture and the students who'd learned that they didn't have to be victims. During lunch, Sarah was approached by David Kim, a junior who'd been one of Tyler's favorite targets before. The arrests. David was naturally quiet and studious, exactly the type of student Tyler had enjoyed intimidating. "Ms. Mitchell," David said nervously, "I wanted to thank you for what you did. I know you didn't do it for me specifically, but Tyler used to make every day miserable for me and a lot of other kids. Since he's been gone, school actually feels safe again." "David, you don't need to thank me. Everyone deserves to feel safe at school." "I know, but I also wanted you to know that I've been accepted to MAT for early admission. My grades went up a whole point after Tyler was arrested because I could finally concentrate on studying instead of worrying about what he might do to me." Sarah felt a surge of pride and satisfaction that had nothing to do with her own victory. This was what the fight had really been about, creating an environment where students like David could reach their potential without fear. As the school day ended, Sarah packed up her materials and prepared to head home. The routine was the same as it had been before Tyler's harassment campaign, but everything felt different. She no longer checked her car for damage or worried about finding threatening messages on her whiteboard. More importantly, she'd rediscovered a sense of purpose that had been missing since leaving the military. Teaching chemistry was fulfilling, but using her unique skills to protect others and create positive change had reminded her why she'd chosen to serve in the first place. Her phone rang as she walked to her car, a new Honda Civic that insurance had provided after Tyler's group destroyed her old one. The caller was Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the superintendent of the neighboring Riverside School District. "Ms. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me calling. I've been following your case, and I'm wondering if you'd be interested in discussing a position with our district. We're creating a new role focused on student safety and anti-harassment initiatives, and your experience and methods would be invaluable." Sarah considered the offer as she drove home. The position would mean leaving Jefferson High, where she'd built relationships and established her reputation. But it would also mean having the opportunity to implement her methods on a larger scale, potentially protecting thousands of students from the kind of systematic harassment Tyler's group had perpetrated. "Dr. Warren, I'm interested in learning more, but I should mention that my methods can be unconventional. Ms. Mitchell, conventional methods clearly weren't working. We need someone who thinks strategically and isn't intimidated by students who think they're untouchable. From what I've seen, you're exactly what we need." That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing the materials Dr. Warren had sent her about the new position. The job description reads like a military intelligence posting, translated into educational language: threat assessment, pattern analysis, evidence gathering, and strategic intervention. She'd come full circle, she realized, after leaving the military. Because she wanted to build rather than destroy, she'd found a way to use her combat training to protect rather than attack. The skills remained the same, but the mission had evolved. Her laptop chimed with an email from Rachel Torres, who was now finishing her senior year with a full scholarship to Northwestern University. The subject line read, "Thank you for changing everything." Ms. Mitchell, the email began, "I'm writing this as I prepare for graduation, and I wanted you to know how much our school has changed since you stopped Tyler's group. The anti-bullying committee I started now has 50 members, and we've helped 12 students document and stop harassment campaigns this year using the methods you taught us. But more than that, you showed all of us that we don't have to accept being victims. You proved that bullies can be beaten if you're smarter and better prepared than they are. I'm majoring in criminal justice because of what I learned from watching you work. Tyler thought he was the predator and you were the prey. He had no idea he was actually a mouse being studied by a hawk." Sarah closed the laptop and looked out her window at the Jefferson High School parking lot, where security cameras now monitored every corner and students walked safely to their cars without fear of harassment. Tyler Brennan had wanted to teach her about the food chain. Instead, she'd taught him, his accomplices, their families, and an entire school district a lesson they'd never forget. In any ecosystem, the most dangerous predator is the one you never see coming. The combat-trained teacher had won more than just a battle against teenage bullies. She'd proven that sometimes the best way to fight monsters is to be the bigger monster, smarter, better prepared, and absolutely ruthless when protecting the innocent. The war was over, but Sarah Mitchell's real mission was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.